Somebody needs to start the show. How about it, Peter?
Hey, everybody. Welcome to 914 Wired, your information source for all things Westchester and the surrounding counties, including the Bronx and other environs. Charlie, how are you today?
We're holding it down on the MLK holiday, Peter.
Steelers. Ardina, how are you today?
I'm great. Glad to have Kevin as a guest after cancellations, rebookings, not on his part, but on my part. Because since we have so many guests for our shows, it's hard to juggle schedules. But the important thing is that we have him today. And he's going to talk about
we have our guest is Kevin Haskell, who's from Eastchester, but he's originally from St. Louis. And he is someone who likes to eat cheeses that people in Westchester County, it's called Provel, and if anyone in Westchester County got a taste of that stuff, they would boycott whatever it is they're eating that is accompanying the.
I'm not familiar with it. I don't even know what you're talking about.
It's an acquired taste.
It's a cheese product they put on pizza and other things that's quasi-Italian.
Quasi-Italian. Boy, talk about sarcasm.
It's something that became popular in the Italian community in the part of the St. Louis called the Hill.
Oh.
And it's as much cheese as Velveeta is, except it's an Italian version of Velveeta, I guess. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about something. I don't know if it's more important, less important to the world, but this is more important for the kids of Eastchester. So, Kevin Haskell, why don't you lay out for us what your premise is about what's going on there?
Sure. So, kind of a synopsis of what's been going on. I have 3 kids. We've been a part of the Eastchester Little League program for almost 10 years. We actually don't live in Eastchester. We live in Lawrence Park West in the Bronxville PO. And there had been some rumors for several years.
Time out. Bronxville PO, but where do you pay property taxes?
Yonkers.
Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So there had been rumors for a couple years that the Eastchester Little League was trying to ban non-resident participants in the Little League. To be perfectly honest, I think a lot of parents and participants didn't give this much credence because we didn't really take it seriously. We didn't think that was going to happen. This was never put up for a vote in Eastchester. It was never put up for a public debate. And the guidelines of Little League International are very clear that eligibility is determined by your residence in a town or within the boundaries of a program, or your attendance at a school within those boundaries. And the reason that's important is because Eastchester and the villages within the town, that of Bronxville and Tuckahoe, very often don't have pre-K and kindergarten programs large enough to take care of their own population. So a lot of those parents choose to send their kids to schools like St. Joseph's in Bronxville, Immaculate Conception in Tuckahoe, the Chapel School in Bronxville, and a number of others. And really, this is when, in early childhood education, relationships and friendships start to blossom. And they really germinate not just in the classroom, but also on the sporting fields, where kids learn values, they learn how to play, they learn how to interact. And Supervisor Colavita in Eastchester unilaterally decided that he would not offer permits to the Eastchester Little League or the Tuckahoe Youth Association to use the park fields in his municipality if they allowed a non-resident who didn't go to their public schools to participate. And what's key to acknowledge here is that these programs are not run by the city or the town of Eastchester. They are independently funded, they are independently staffed by volunteers, but they do use the municipal fields. They also use some of the school fields. So this is concerning for a number of us who have been involved in Eastchester Little League. I've volunteered as a coach for a number of years. That used to be the rule. If you weren't a resident, you had to volunteer. Totally fine, totally understandable. We've offered a number of compromises. People that aren't residents would be willing to pay a surcharge. They'd be willing to volunteer. None of this has been met with any positive reception.
Okay, that's a good starting point. Kevin, can you tell us what was the transformation? What changed recently?
So, I mean, as far as I know, and again, I'm not on the board of any of these programs. I'm just a concerned parent. But what changed is Supervisor Colavita decided that this just wasn't how it was going to be. And in his letter to me, he actually goes through a litany of reasons that he says, some that are connected, some that are not. These are fields that are funded by the Eastchester taxpayer. He's claiming they've spent millions of tax dollars on these fields. In the fields that I've played on, other than the recently renovated Garth Road field, this is little more than mowing. I mean, I'm seriously concerned that some of these kids could sprain their ankles in these fields.
Okay, but what I'm getting at is historically, your place of residence didn't preclude you from participating in a league that played on an Eastchester field. Is that correct?
Correct.
But now,
Correct.
Mr. Colavita, the supervisor of Eastchester, the town supervisor of Eastchester, is saying, henceforth, you have to be an Eastchester resident, or you cannot play on these fields. Is that right?
Not entirely, because some of these schools will allow you to tuition in. So if you're not an Eastchester resident, but you decide to pay tuition at Bronxville schools, or Tuckahoe schools, or Eastchester schools, then you can play.
Okay.
But other than that, he is saying you cannot. And in fact, as I mentioned, when you go on the Little League International website, they are very explicit. There are 2 ways you can qualify. You are a resident of the program, or you attend school within the boundaries of the program.
And those are the rules. But hang on, that policy statement comes from a Little League a national Little League organization.
Correct. So, like, if you wanted to go to the Little League World Series, this would be the organization that, would enforce those rules.
Yeah.
And when this came down, I was, because as I posted on Nextdoor, which is, and I am not the type of person that would normally post on a Nextdoor. Normally it's a bit of a dumpster fire, for lack of a better term. But, it was interesting to see the comments that were coming out, and people were saying, this is how it is everywhere. Well, okay, I posted it, so I'll be naturally curious. So I went on the Little League websites in Pelham, Larchmont, Rye, Scarsdale. These are all comparable municipalities in the area. All the same. Your qualification is you live in the district or you attend school in the district.
Private or public.
Correct.
Okay, so Ardina, this reminds me of what we spoke with Fred Polvere about a few weeks ago.
Scout Field.
All right, and it seems like there's this emerging, I don't know if it's a trend, but there's a tilting of some sort. It's a provincialism. I won't call it a turf war. It's not a turf war, but it's a low-grade turf beef that seems to be emerging around the parks and these quasi-governmental accommodations.
But it's also hypocritical because Colavito has no problem. That whole Lake Isle issue involved Eastchester and Mount Vernon. He had no problem utilizing Mount Vernon's fields. He has no problem using those fields at all. They're in Mount Vernon, but he allows them. And I saw you shaking your head up and down, Kevin. It's capricious, is what it is. There's no other way around this, because he's two-faced. He does it when it benefits him, and now he's being draconian when he thinks he has the right to do that.
Well,
right or wrong?
Ardina.
Well,
let me interrupt for a quick second. I think that I personally think that there's some more nefarious reasons at hand.
So do I.
And those nefarious reasons are because let us remember that Eastchester is bordered by Eastchester is very close to Yonkers and Mount Vernon.
Right.
So in many ways, this is
black versus Italian. Black versus Italian. That's
it is. I don't want to say it's Italian. I want to say that it's an issue of just let's leave that at the exclusion of Yonkers kids and Mount Vernon kids participating in Eastchester kids' alleged turf. That's what it comes down to, and it spreads out to what we're talking about today with Kevin's issue.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned Scout Field because I actually had a conversation with Rich Thomas, the former mayor of Mount Vernon. And as you all know, Scout Field is a county park but jointly administered by Eastchester, Mount Vernon, and Yonkers. And I guess when Rich's administration was in power in Mount Vernon, Colavita had kind of, raised discussions of this sort of policy. And then, kind of Rich's position was, well, then you can't use Scout Field because Bronxville put a lot of money into building a very nice baseball diamond down there.
Yeah.
But if you want to say that's for the exclusive use of Bronxville and the residents of Eastchester, well, then why don't all the Yonkers and Eastchester residents that go to St. Joseph's in Bronxville insist that that's also their home field?
Yeah. Kevin, this sounds to me like provincialism. It sounds like it's tinged with racial animosity of some sort. I can't quite put my finger on
Tinged?
it.
It's more than tinged.
It's problematic. And what I'm saying here is like these communities that you're talking about are too small to have these sorts of issues. It's like there's a certain amount of land. We're all here. Okay. Nobody was, I don't think there's a hospital in Eastchester. I guess there is in Bronxville. Very few of us were born on this ground. It's all Indian territory originally. So why can't we all just kind of get along and let the Little League teams play where they want to play?
Well, and I'd even go, like, if Colavita wants to, as I said, he said it was about their taxes and their expenditures and improper registrations of non-resident school students and, so on and so forth. But I would argue that, especially, and I've lived up here 12 years now in this area, and, the Eastchester, Mount Vernon, Yonkers, Bronxville, Tuckahoe area, it's all symbiotic. And if you want to, if you want to tell the communities of St. Joseph's or ICS or Chapel that they're not welcome in Eastchester after school hours, well, what's the commercial impact of that to the Eastchester taxpayer? If I stop getting my dry cleaning done in Eastchester, if I stop patronizing Bronxville restaurants, if I stop doing back to school shopping, in Eastchester and Bronxville, of which almost all the families in the Chapel and St. Joseph's communities that I'm a part of do.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 7-figure impact to the taxpayer's bottom line. Yes, these, many of the comments where I busted my butt to buy a house in Eastchester, you should do the same. Well, that's great, but those same people are also complaining about their property taxes. Do they think those are going to go down or up if people take their business out of their municipality?
Yeah, and so what? You chose to live where you chose to live. I mean, there's no fence around Eastchester. There's no fence around Yonkers. People are going to choose.
Not yet. Not yet.
People are going to choose to live in different places for a variety of different reasons. Kevin, you're very thoughtfully raising the economic issues here, but I'm just like kind of look at it like on an empathetic level. You're talking about kids ages 6, 7, 8, 9 years old playing in Little League. What could possibly be the harm from allowing them to participate in a Little League that happens to play on a field in Eastchester? I don't. I just don't get it.
And again, no one is asking for unfettered access to these leagues. We're not saying anyone should be able to play. We're saying abide by the guidelines that have always been in place.
Right.
Abide by the recommended guidelines of the Little League International and the same guidelines all the other municipalities are following.
Are you asking, have you written to Little League International and asked them to remove the exclusivity or the ability for them to call themselves a Little League?
Well, and that's where I said that there could be an impact on some of the, young athletes in Eastchester, because I know that there is an effort by some concerned parents to go directly to Little League International.
And decertify them.
And to decertify them, which means, say you get a talented team in Eastchester Little League or the Tuckahoe Youth Association, they wouldn't be able to go to the Little League World Series. And in fact, I got, there was a letter sent out by the Tuckahoe Youth Association, who also uses the Eastchester fields, being very clear that they did not want this to happen. And they petitioned Colavita not to take this policy My understanding is the Eastchester Little League did the same. So this is not a policy that these programs want enforced. My youngest child, he just turned 5 years old. He had his first year of T-ball this year. He loved it. All of his class members are in there. Some of them live in Bronxville, some are in Eastchester, some are in Yonkers. And when we told him he couldn't play on that team again, he just burst into tears. That's the impact.
It's heartbreaking. It's impossible to explain at his level. So, Kevin, as a parent, as a coach who's not paid for any of this, what do you tell your kid in that situation?
The trying to explain municipal government to a 5-year-old is not the easiest thing to do. And I said, unfortunately, there are some people that, don't want to mix with other people. And, we're not like that. Our community's not like that. It would be the equivalent, we're parishioners at St. Joseph's in Bronxville. And, we have CYO basketball. And probably half the athletes go to the Bronxville school.
What does CYO stand for?
Catholic Youth Organization.
Thank you.
And, but it would be tantamount to us telling students of Bronxville that they can't play in our basketball league.
Right.
Which, and there were some parents who suggested that we do that, and I always have to listen to my mother, God rest her soul, in the back of my head saying 2 wrongs don't make a right.
Have you talked to a lawyer about suing Eastchester?
I know that there are some members of the community who are lawyers who have kind of floated the idea, but quite frankly, pooling the money to do it or finding somebody to do it pro bono is difficult at best.
Sure.
This is one of those things where maybe, and I think that there are some very nefarious reasons to your point that Supervisor Colavita came to this decision. But if we take a step back and say, let's just give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and he was worried about traffic or impact on the fields. I'm not sure a bunch of 6-year-olds running around on grass makes that much of an impact, but once you hear from a number of concerned parents and children, don't you just take a step back and think maybe this wasn't the best decision?
Yeah,
I think it's part of a master plan. I did do some online snooping, and apparently he's done the same thing with the soccer league. The soccer league, if you go to the Eastchester Soccer League page, it says that inclusion on the soccer league team are the towns of Eastchester, Tuckahoe, and Bronxville. Says nothing about Yonkers, says nothing about Mount Vernon. And there also is an exception for children who attend the Eastchester public school system. But here again, we're talking about exclusivity.
And these schools, these districts don't operate in a vacuum. 20% of the budget for the Eastchester public schools is state and federal funding. So it's not as though people aren't putting in. And again, people have offered to pay a surcharge, but if it's just mind-boggling to me that you would say, hey, you can go to school together, but you can't swing a bat together. You can't kick a ball together. Like, these are children.
So Kevin,
how old
yeah.
is Colavita in his 70s now?
That I don't know.
Well, this is, Kevin, I think Peter's thinking what I'm thinking. This town supervisor of Eastchester is not a novice at Eastchester politics. He is a long-time person. I don't know how far back, but it goes back a long way because I've been around here and I've heard his name for decades. So he understands the political implications. He's a very connected person in the Westchester County Republican Party. What could he possibly be thinking? What is this America's cultural civil war washing up into the Little League? Is that what this is?
Yeah.
I think that's what this is, Ardina.
Yeah, I mean, cultural imperialism is done in overt and both covert ways. And for somebody of Colavita's generation and perhaps political persuasion, this is part of the playbook. This is just how it's done. And I don't mean not to be dismissive, but again, it is part of their playbook. And we see it manifest itself at the voting booth,
Right.
and we see it manifest itself in local communities, such as what we're talking about today.
Well,
He's in
And
his
it's a
early.
shame.
By the way,
So
he's in his early 60s.
I'll take another side to that, Ardina, or not another side, but another angle per se, because I've been a lifelong Republican until 2016. now I'm an independent, but you know, this isn't the playbook of one party or another. This is the playbook of autocrats and bullies, and those exist in every party. And one of the things that I noticed in doing a brief cross reference on LinkedIn, which I thought was interesting, and you guys having much more experience in local politics here might have some insight, but some of the loudest voices defending this decision and getting a bit nasty with some of the posters are actually public employees in Eastchester and Tuckahoe.
Wow.
There's an employee in the town registrar's office at Eastchester. There's a teacher at the Tuckahoe Public Schools. And I wonder, and I have no evidence of this, but I wonder if there's not a sense of weaponizing local government here.
It's a good point. It's a very good point.
Kevin,
Yeah, yeah.
do you have any background as a political scientist? Because you're making some very insightful points.
As a younger person, I was very, very politically involved. I worked in the Bush White House. I raised a lot of money for Mitt Romney when he was still governor of Massachusetts. I went to school up there and lived up there. Going all the way back to the late 90s, working on local campaigns in St. Louis, where I was from. I think that and I think like so many of us, I've been so disheartened in recent years as to the low levels that the tone of our political discourse has taken. I was raised in a house, a lot of people say, never talk religion or politics. And that was the opposite of our dinner table. We always talked religion and politics, but it's not that we shouldn't talk politics or we shouldn't talk religion. It's that we need to be able to have that conversation in a civil tone where just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I need to demonize you.
Yeah.
And I think that, to your point that you made, like that kind of simmering down into things like a local little league is just evidence of how corrosive the discourse has become.
I would leave on that note, Kevin. You are a parent, a little league coach, a Westchester resident. You're raising your hand and synthesizing important issues. And I can tell you, on behalf of Ardina and Peter, this isn't unique. We've had other shows on topics that are very similar. We mentioned Scout Field. We mentioned the Bronxville, not Ardina. What's it called? Not the Bronxville, the Field House.
The Field Club.
The Field Club.
Bronxville Field Club, yes.
So there's these sort of mini turf conflicts that go on, and they really kind of boil down to this low grade provincialism. But I don't see anything good ever coming out of that, because it's like you're talking about your neighbors. If you can't find a way to get along with the people who live within 4 miles, for crying out loud, we're not talking about a conflict on the other side
Charlie,
of the world.
your mistake, Charlie, is that you think that they consider each other neighbors, and people who live
They don't.
in some of these communities
They don't.
don't consider anyone but the people who pay taxes in that community to be their neighbors. They don't consider.
Peter, that is a social and political disintegration, right there.
But that's the
Well,
way.
but
But
that's
that's
the
been that way.
reality.
Look, Ardina, Charles, the three of us have lived in Westchester most of our lives, right? And it's been that way in Westchester for generations. I mean, we're talking about Bronxville like it's some grand experiment in great social conversation. And until the 1970s or 80s, Jews or blacks could not legally live in Bronxville until the 1970s.
It's the
So I mean,
existence of
it's not like
visible-
there's just some great communities to begin with. Like Kevin, you're not from here, so you don't know about some of these things. But there are country clubs in some of these communities that to this day don't accept Jews and blacks in Westchester County.
Absolutely,
No.
absolutely. There's always been the existence of invisible walls,
Right.
in Westchester. What we're experiencing now is those invisible walls have moved have now incorporated classism. So not back in the day when Peter and I were growing up, it was blacks and Jews, and now it has been extended to people of other classes. That's exactly what it is. Now the thing is, how do we change it? I mean, the irony is that you have fire departments in these districts that have a cooperation system called mutual aid. In other words, if there's a big fire in Yonkers, God forbid, and there aren't enough firemen, they will enlist firemen from other towns. That's fine when that happens. But when you were talking about young children from other towns playing sports in Eastchester, then all of a sudden that's off the table.
Well, and I would say that, I've lived here for a dozen years, and I was shocked by some of the things that you just discussed, because I grew up in a very different community in the Midwest, and we originally lived in Fleetwood, now we live in Yonkers, and kind of the bubble that surrounds some of these towns, imaginary or otherwise, was shocking to me. And the question is, how do we fix that? It's Little League. It's let kids play together.
Right.
Let them make friends in neighboring communities. I mean, when I first moved to Bronxville, I think my first introduction to this was kind of a 2x4 to the head. We were having dinner with some friends of friends who arranged a dinner for us to meet with this family in Bronxville. And the father was discussing how he sent his daughter to Kenya that summer to volunteer for a week. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. Like, why? What made you do that? And he's like, well, she's got to realize that the world isn't like Bronxville. And I looked at him and I go, why not go down 22 and volunteer in Mount Vernon?
That's a powerful
You don't need to go
point.
to Kenya.
That's a very powerful
Wow.
point. And I appreciate you coming on here on behalf of Peter Moses and Ardina Seward, my partners in crime in 914 Wired. Thank you, Kevin Haskell, for raising your hand, telling this story, and coming on 914 Wired. That's going to wrap it up for today. I'm Charlie Stern. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, follow on YouTube, and we're going to get more guests out here like Kevin Haskell. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again.